reconvening to deliberate on our submissions from, you have to excuse my terrible thought, I'm a bit afraid I would have preferred to have been there, but come down with the old lurgy test of positives this morning, so would have loved to have been there personally, but it is what it is. So, okay, so good. I don't know, we got Janice there? Or?
Anna's going to do one for us today, John.
Anna, thank you, Anna. Thank you.
Tuia ki te Māori o te whenua, tuia ki te mana o te tangata, tuia ki te pono te aroha, kia piki, kia ika, kia te taumata, huie taikia.
Thank you. All right. We have one apology from Stephen Media Christine Rankin, so I'll move have a second.
Happy to second, John. Kathy.
Thanks, Kathy. All in favour?
Aye.
Okay, first, just thank you very much. First, before start, I'd like to welcome everybody back to the elect members back to this meeting, and also staff members, and also people live streaming up there on Zoom World. Obviously, this proposal has attracted a lot of interest, so which is what democracy is all about. So it was wonderful to see the feedback from the community. Firstly, before we get into the 5.1, sorry, I was going to follow this meeting on my phone, on my iPad at the meeting, but now I'm having to use my phone because I can't see the agenda. So we're going to be deliberating on submissions to the review of the Taupō Bay Lakeshore Reserves Management Plan. But before we do this, I'd ask Rakai, I'd like to, without prejudice to any outcome one way or the other, to speak on the update on the hui, the Waihi Marae Hapu, and also we acknowledge the letter for the revised proposal. So I invite you, Rakai, to say a few words.
Kia ora, Chair. Kia ora, Chair. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I suppose, yes, starting with the Chair's comments with regard to the hui, with our hapu, I understand you've got a letter similar to that I have here. Very successful hui from our perspective, and I think from the hapu's perspective, we've taken on board certainly the conditions that they've talked about, and also, which isn't here, I also, if successful, we offered an interest if they wanted to partake in the catering side of things, because their kitchens are sort of, well, almost commercial kitchens these days, so I offered that to them as well on top. But yeah, good day, and I think it was just good to touch base with them face to face, as I've identified here. So very pleased from our perspective, and I think certainly from the hapu perspective it's good not only to talk about this item, but also, because I've got a number of hats, to talk about other developments we're doing at the moment, as well as some housing issues that we're entering into. So yeah, all around good hui of providing information to our folk. So that's that. Happy to answer any questions of anyone if they wish. I suppose with the hearing process, which was, I'm always we live in democracy, so not a benevolent dictatorship that I like from time to time. It was really good to hear all the comments from folk, and I'm a believer in that. Would have liked a little bit few more yays, but it is what it is. So we went back to our drawing board, TMGH, with our designers, and sort of came up with a new type of I suppose, a less, for our purposes anyway, a less cluttered look. We obviously put in stage 1 and stage 2. We heard the issues around stage 2 that the folk were talking about, and so, as I've said in the letter, we're quite happy, if you're happy, to proceed on that basis, which is only stage 1. Obviously, such an investment would garner some connection to the lease period, and we'd like some consideration there going forward in terms of if we go forward on this, it would be much appreciated and probably calculable in terms of that effort being appreciated. But I think that's pretty much it in terms of any information from us, and just really happy to go through this process actually, and I really appreciate Council's support for your officers. They've been very helpful and have been quite, how can I say, helpful in terms of identifying the roadway. So we really appreciate that. And thank you, John, and your staff. But any questions? Happy to answer any questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Kia ora, okay. If there are any questions from around the table there?
Just through the chair, John.
Yeah,
Raka kia ora, nice to see you. I noted in your support letter with the new schematics that you had made it very clear that that these plans have not been developed to the detail required for a resource consent.
Yep.
And it was through that process that you would move into a more detailed design.
Yep.
So the scheme 2 that you have actually shown,
Yes.
is that something that you will move through to a detailed design, or are you looking at something completely different again?
Well, and I suppose I'm not trying to do a quid pro quo here, but our attention to the second stage would certainly, definitely require a longer term. It marries. It's a place we'd like to go. It's a place we'd like to go down the line, but I suppose for the process we have today, we have what we have. But certainly that is a hope, if I can say that, because it's really more about the connection to the lake.
Yes. So the renders that you have given us, the detailed pictures, for want of a better word, the second lot of pictures, that the option there,
Yep.
Is that going to be something that you would then take through to a more detailed design?
Yes, if given the opportunity.
Great.
If given the opportunity, certainly the design that we've put in front of you, as a, I suppose, as a result of the hearings, has less clutter, and even then, if I could say personally, I'd like it to be a little bit more see-through, so to speak. You know, so those are certainly the designs we have for you today, but if there's any further designs, they'll be, once we go through the resource consent process, they won't be anything more than what you have in front of you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. If there are any other questions, Raka? We can,
Yep, wait.
Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just a point of clarification. This is being tabled today. How do we handle that? Do we just receive that as information, or do we need to formally resolve to accept that? We do? Just noted them, because the submissions are closed, haven't they? So it's not, yeah, so just kind of, it's not a late submission, it's just a point of information for us.
Yeah, I suppose at the hearing they asked me whether I would go to the hui, and I said yes.
Yeah.
And thankfully they've given this, so appreciate that.
Cool, no problems. Thank you, I just thought that could be noted, thanks.
So, through the chair, John, thank you, Your Worship, for that question. And right, for me, this just close us off that loop. So it was left hanging at the last meeting we had. So thank you for the letter. I don't see it as a new submission. I don't see it as any new information. It's just simply completing that part of the process. So thank you.
Yeah, cool.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm getting the gist. The actual quality of the actual sound back to me is not fantastic, but appreciate the feedback anyway to Rake's comments anyway, narrative. So okay, so if no other questions. Thank you, Rake, for your time, and we'll just proceed now with the deliberations on the submissions.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Rake.
Have a good day.
Yep.
Do we need to?
So
the
Nick Carroll's going to jump in now.
the item, or?
Sorry, John. Nick Carroll's going to jump in now and just work through the report.
Oh, thanks, John.
Okay.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, John. Look, I'm going to get Alison to work through the report because actually she's the technical expert here, so she'll be able to answer any questions that you've got on the report. All I wanted to say up front was sometimes we can lose sight of the fact that consultation's about collecting information. It's about understanding views, different perspectives, and the reason behind those views, and it's not a referendum process. And that's all I wanted to say up front, was just a reminder that we shouldn't be looking at submissions as a referendum as such. It's about an information gathering exercise to make sure that you as decision makers are as widely informed as you possibly can be before you make your decisions. So I'll, without any further ado, hand it over to...
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure how to word this. There seems to be a feeling out in the district, so to speak, that a full review of this management plan be actually carried out, which is this here. Are we going to go through a process to end up by deciding that's what needs to be done? Or are we just going to make a decision on what's been put before us?
I can respond to that. Ultimately, it's your call as councillors. This is your reserve management plan that you use to manage the reserves that you look after on behalf of the community. Our officer advice has been, we've got a very targeted application. We've got a very specific issue that we're trying to address. If we open up the entire reserve management plan, we're looking at probably a couple of years in terms of process to work through that. And what that will do is it will hold up any decision making with regard to this specific issue. Now, you've certainly got both options open to you and they're canvassed in the report, but the challenge is opening up the entire management plan does bring a whole lot of complexity with it. The second thing I'd say is that my team is looking to change tack in terms of how we how we look after our reserve management plans. We've got a lot sitting across the district. Most of them are actually quite old. A number of them are actually out of date. And one of the reasons why we've ended up in this situation is because we've got a whole lot of plans to look after. We're now looking at a proposal to actually bring those together into a more consolidated reserve management plan. So essentially one across the district. That's not without some challenges, but we think that it will lead to a much better management regime and certainly a much simpler management regime for our operational staff and for you as decision makers as well. When stuff comes in front of you in this committee setting. So while we could jump into a review of the entire management plan for the Bay, actually, I think that might be unnecessary given that other work that we're doing to look at a consolidated reserve management plan for the district. So certainly our advice is, you've got a targeted issue, we suggest you just make amendments to the current reserve management plan to deal with that.
Could I just follow on, Mr. Chairman, with the comment made that if we don't put in place in the future for a full management plan, we may find that as a council we're challenged. And that's the concern that I have. And if we read on page, where are we here? Page 14, it states, council as administrative body should be focused on the managing the reserve as public land that the community can recreate on rather than being focused on encouraging economic activity. This is the primary purpose of the land under the Reserve Act, which is the reason I believe that a full review should be made.
So at this point, I'll hand over to Alison to answer any questions that you have specifically on the report.
Kia ora koutou.
Thanks, Alison.
I'm assuming we can take the report as read. You've got it in front of you. You have hopefully all read it. But I am happy to answer any questions that you may have.
I think just responding to Councillor Body's comments, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, well, back in November we resolved to carry a partial review of the reserve management plan to accommodate this application to go forward. It's quite clear that, trying to keep it simple as I can here, that we've got down to two options. I think options three and four are the only options, the logical options. It either happens or it doesn't. But I think we need to sort of not overcomplicate this. I think we're just going to stick to the proposal from the hole in one, to up the group holdings, and proceed. And also, I think obviously a comprehensive review of the management plan in the future, I think will be something that will be dealt within the parameters of the Reserves Acts and the ability of the reserve management plans to accommodate. I think basically what, from my perspective, I'll give my perspective on with the submissions, and it's like you said earlier, it's fantastic having a great response with something that's going to sort of capture the community's imagination. And often with submissions are very subjective, personal views, or preference, and some just can be made, and often they either can be true or they may not be true. That's the beauty of having a consultation process. But you want to keep some objectivity around it. For example, around the legality of it, which is the process is purely able to do this, within the actual within the process, and also maybe the precedents. I can understand in the community to see a precedent being set, proliferation of constructions along the lakefront, but in this situation the precedent is pretty watertight because it only applies to this particular activity. And with assumptions around, for example, the views, they're very subjective. I mean, obviously that may or may not impact, but I don't think it's something that probably would do. Maybe the only person that maybe have a entitlement to that particular aspect is the actual submission from the motel. That's all right, but I think given what's happening with the proposal being modified, it does appear that it's going to go along with the concerns. That's just my aspect, my personal view anyway. But I'd just like to go around the room anyway, just getting people's. I was at the end of the day, we have to back your own minds up whether you believe that to be true or not, and philosophically or when it's going to be something that's going to mitigate. The mitigation has been given through some of the changes or not. But yeah, so if we could go around the room, if anyone's got comments on that, whether supporting or not, very happy to hear
Well,
feedback,
I'm happy to jump in, John.
Mr. Chairman.
I've got a couple of questions, but before I ask the questions, a couple of comments. Nick, I agree. This is not majority rule. This is not a popularity contest, nor is this a question of stacking up the numbers of submissions for and against and just going with whatever. It's a question of looking at the rights and wrongs and what is the most appropriate thing. So thank you for that comment. I entirely agree. The other comment I would make is when we were presented with this concept and proposal right at the very beginning, I thought it was a wonderful idea and absolutely in favour. I thought it was very good. I will concede that was without viewing it through the lens of what we now know and what we have now been privy to in terms of what's in the papers, not the submissions, the other stuff. Which brings me to my questions, and I apologise I haven't given you these beforehand to give a chance to research them. So I have two primary concerns. My first one is around precedent, and I read your comment on this in the paper that this is not precedent setting. However, I note this is a significant change from a concession and a licence to occupy to a lease. And I concede it's not a new business, it's an existing business, but it is a brand new lease, albeit for an activity that already exists. So that concerns me, that it would be a brand new lease, and I don't believe I have sufficient information to make a considered decision in that respect, which brings me to my next question. So my first question is, the fact that it's changing its legal status from a right to occupy concession to a lease, I'd be interested in a more robust opinion around what precedent setting that actually triggers, if any, and I would need some supporting facts and information on that. The second one is around the Reserves Management Act, and I note that that is referred to and there's some pushback on one or two of the submissions around some other bit of what I thought was obscure legislation, but be that as it may, I don't want to be demeaning in that. And I thank you for the summary on that and the pushback, but I couldn't see a robust legal opinion that any decision we make in terms of allowing this type of venture in a reserve has actually been from my perspective, robustly canvassed. So I guess my question is, what level of rigour around a legal opinion have we had? Can you decipher the questions out of my waffle there, or do you want me to start again?
I think so. This is where I'm going to defer to Alison as the subject matter expert. She knows the Reserves Act much better than I do.
Okay. The Reserves Act does make provision for leases, licences, commercial use of reserve land under sections 53 and 54 of the Act. So there was an option when you looked at this process back in November last year, when you decided to go through with the partial review of the management plan, there was the option at that stage of just notifying the intent to grant a lease and treating this as a standalone project, but you quite rightly made the decision to review the management plan to incorporate the provisions within the management plan. And this is because the Reserves Act allows councils to grant leases and licences of recreation reserves for business, trade and occupation, as long as it's necessary for, got the words in here, sorry, I can't remember them off the top of my head. But essentially, as long as it's consistent with the purpose of the reserve, which is recreation use, and is necessary for the benefit and enjoyment of the users of the reserve. So that provision is in there, but you can only do it if there are policies in your management plan that say, yes, we've set aside this reserve for this particular purpose, and we have decided we're going to grant a lease to these people for this activity. And that's what was missing, that was the element that was missing. So that's the reason that you're dotting the I's, crossing the T's, making sure the management plan is consistent with the intent to grant a lease, and in that way you're covering yourselves, and it's entirely above board.
Yep, thank you. Which brings me back to my first question around precedent, because this would be a new lease, and I guess the question would be one of equity. If we were to allow this to occur and then said a flat no, and I see that's in the papers, that we should, if we were to do this, we then rule a line, build a wall this far and no further. I guess in the minds of a lot of people, and that flavour did come through in some of the submissions, how equitable would that be? And that's my concern around the precedent setting.
Can I just clarify, Mr. Chair? So the existing operation is a licence to occupy,
Yes, it is.
and they've requested a lease?
They didn't bring it up. We actually brought it up, and the reason is that a licence to occupy essentially gives the occupant the right to undertake an activity on the land.
Right.
They don't have the right to build anything, to leave anything there. They can come in, do their activity, pack up and go. And so it's an ephemeral sort of activity. When it's there, when it's not, it's not. And that's the way that most of the activities on the lakefront have been, because council, when doing this management plan back in 2008, 2009, decided that it wanted very low impact activities. People come, people go. They provide the activity when they're there. When they're not, you don't know they're there, really, or don't know they've been. We raised the idea of a lease because the building work that the applicant wants to do it's permanent structures. It's not something you can do under a licence. You can't put it on the back of a truck and take it away at the end of the day.
Right.
So that's the main difference, is the permanency of the structures, and also the length of term that they would want to have security of tenure to ensure they get some return on investment.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it's, sorry to divert to another location, but the float plane office would be a lease? Or you're saying it's the first lease we're doing?
The float plane off. I'm not familiar with that area.
We approved that though, don't we? So previously then, so take us back a couple of years, when it was when we never approved anything there?
The yacht club bunkers on our land.
So if I could jump in here, I think that's where some of the conversation, particularly in this submission's got a little bit sidetracked, and particularly with reference to the 2 Mile Bay Sailing Centre. That's not within our scope. It's not our mandate. It's not on council land, and I think we just need to be really clear. That's got nothing to do with this process. That's my view of it anyway. Well, that's what from reading the papers. Would that be correct?
That is correct, yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, back to you.
Also, I would say that when the management plan, the original management plan was done back in 2008, 2009, at that time the councillors were very clear that they were drawing a line in the sand, that they were allowing existing activities at the existing scale, but no more. So this is really, it's not that different to that. It's allowing one activity to upscale, but it doesn't really depart greatly from the intent of the original management plan, which was to prevent proliferation of activity and construction.
I just wanted to, through you, Mr. Chair, thanks for that. I appreciate your comments. I'm going to have to respectfully agree to disagree on that, because in my mind, changing from what is a temporary, you can pick it up and as if you have not been there, licence to occupy, to a permanent structure lease, that is a significant change in my view. And that's just my personal view. So I guess I'm signalling, and I don't want to preempt anything, I would require more information, particularly a fairly robust and detailed legal opinion on the Reserves Act, to include what the precedent setting would be, changing from a licence to occupy to a lease, before I'd be prepared to make a decision on that. So I'm not a yes, I'm not a no, I want more information in those two streams. That's where I'm sitting today.
I guess what I would add to the conversation is there are relatively few existing operations where we've got concession sites along the lakefront. Clearly we've got the hole-in-one. I know we've got the coffee cart, coffee caravan, a little bit further down along the main beach, and I think there's not the gelato place next to that, and the parasailing tent. So you've got some existing operations, relatively few, who operate on a temporary basis, shall we say, the ability to pick up the gelato caravan and go away. There is the potential for one of those operations to come in, if you approve this, and say, we'd now like to turn our temporary thing into a permanent thing. I think that's a risk that you need to be alive to. What I would say is that risk is relatively limited, in that we're talking about a very small number of operations, and there may be some reasons why you want to differentiate this one compared to the others, and that might be around, if I think about some of the objectives that Taupo Moana Group Holdings have talked about, it's been about cover for their staff, it's been about toilet facilities, which is easily accessible for their staff. It's about making it an all-weather event. Those things are different when you compare it to, say, the coffee caravan or the gelato place, where they've already got cover for their staff, they've already got facilities which keep them safe in an all-weather environment. They don't necessarily need to have a whole lot of outdoor space that's covered for them to be able to operate. So it may be that there are some differentiating factors which separate this operation from the others in terms of getting to a point where you're comfortable with the build structure. What I don't think you're going to get from a legal opinion is a firm, yes, you can do it, or no, you can't, because that's not how legal opinions tend to operate in this context. What you will get is are you able to grant the decision? Yes. Will that prevent others from applying? No, it won't. And you'll have to deal with those on their merits.
So I'll finish off with this because I don't want to hog the whole conversation. Thanks, Nick. I appreciate that. No, I know that a legal opinion will not tell you what to do. It will give you a range of options, and it will give you the consequences of what the options are. If you do this, then these other things are now in play, or potentially in play. That's what we don't have. And while I appreciate all the commentary around all of the logistical and staffing issues and housing for people within the operations, that, to my mind, I'll park that over here. The issue is around the Reserves Act and around the precedent that this sets. It comes back to the lease versus license to occupy and what that does, irrespective of who else is there. There's only 2 others on the lakefront at the moment. Well, that's 2022. 2030, there might be none, there might be 5. Or there might be applications for however many. We can't predict the future, but we need to be prepared that when the future arrives, we're actually in a safe and an appropriate place. That's my concern.
And just through the chair, John, with all due respect, we talk about the hole-in-one as being an existing business. It's been there for a long time, and those that have been in Taupō for a number of years certainly know how long that's been. It hasn't stopped them from being a successful business, and so I'd push back on the fact that it's all about staff. What it's really about is profit. They want to increase their business, the returns from their business. And I go back to Councillor Boddy's original comments around, you know, as an administering body, we should be managing the reserve so that the community can recreate rather than being focused on an economic activity. So, you know, I'm obviously there has been some discussion. I'm of the view that this is far more important than for us to make a decision today around this table. I think this needs to be really thought about very clearly, as it was back in 2008, and that the decision needs to be made by full council, not just the Reserves Committee.
Okay, I think at this point, thanks for all those feedback. We did say before we resolved in November, rightly or wrongly, to do a partial review of the reserve management plan to accommodate this application. So it's irrespective of whether, you know, we appreciate Kevin's not saying yes or no, so it's more opinion on legalities, as I say, we can't predict the future. And with Kathy's comments, you know, hear what you're saying, the economic, they're there to improve the economic gain from their business, but also it's going to attract, by developing, it's going to provide a much more attractive amenity there, not just to them, but to the community. So, really at the end of the day, we have to make a decision on what we believe is the right thing, notwithstanding the feedback from the community. As Nick Carroll quite rightly, I support his view. It's not a referendum, it's a personal view, and often we have to accommodate, we have to take into account as well, you know, whether it's subjective or not. So, okay, so at this stage, is there any more comments from other councillors? It's interesting, Kathy, you mentioned there's probably something that should go back to full council. It's probably, as we're delegated to make this decision, the roads on reserves. I hear what you're saying, but I think we just have to take responsibility and either make a decision one way or the other in this instance.
Yeah, John, Yvonne here. I'm in agreement with Kathy. I actually think it's not just about the reserves and roading. I think this is quite a monumental decision that we are going to make for the whole district, and I think it does warrant going to full council, and I'm not trying to put the decision off, but I don't think we've got all the information that we need. I understand the new concept that's been put in front of us, but again, we've got a couple of options there to look at, and I'd still be really interested to see what maybe that stage 2 would look at, because I believe we will get challenged by people other than who's operating in the area at the moment, and we've got to be able to sit back and know that we've made the right decision for the district. We know that there's been a lot of submissions in on this proposition, and I think we do need to take the time to get it right for all parties.
Thank you, Yvonne.
John, David here. I'm slightly different. Slightly different. I said is just a natural upgrade of an iconic product, small upgrade, stage 1. You know, I'd be reasonably happy with. You know, from what the existing operation is now, as you say, it's 20 or 30 years old. It just needs a bit of a jizz up and a bit of a couple of amenities there that people can use. From what I've heard out in the community, people weren't happy with the first proposal. It was just too big, far too big. And I agree with John. If they did apply for stage 2, at some stage, yeah, then we do the full review, absolutely, or whatever that process needs to take place. But at the moment, let's replace the old bus and put a small kiosk there I'd be reasonably comfortable with it, and I think the community would be, but I'm totally happy with Kathy and Yvonne's suggestion, take it back to full council just to get their, support or their, so they have the same information as we've had, but I think something needs to happen. Economic, yes, profit's all about that sort of thing, but hey, a nice little kiosk aesthetically, I think would look quite good down there. But that's just my view and what I've heard from around the town. But happy to go with what the committee suggests this afternoon. That's for sure.
Just through the chair, John, Kathy, and that was what I was just trying to establish from Rakai is, the concept plan that we've been given may not necessarily be the plan that is submitted for the resource consent. So I'm a bit, in agreement with Kevin that, until we've got the information, we can't really make a decision.
Yeah.
Because until we see working drawings or some more confirmed design, it makes it very difficult. And I know that will be part of the resource consent, but we need to understand what it is that we're saying or agreeing to. And it's not until they move into that resource consent phase that they'll complete those design drawings. So at this stage, it's pretty much just a nice sketch.
So what we're approving today is a land use consent, is it? Is it? No?
No.
What are we doing?
Today is about the reserves management.
Yeah.
So today's about the reserve management plan and whether you're going to amend the reserve management plan to enable a permanent structure to be built there.
Instead of a temporary one, which is there now.
It's about
Not
setting
bad.
up the management plan to enable that. Then there are mechanisms and other processes that we'll have to put in place. There'll be a resource management process because it will undoubtedly need to be notified, I expect, in that location. So there'll be a public process, and that may well result in some change to the design of the building. And then if you decide to proceed, there'll be some sort of contractual arrangement associated with the lease agreement where you've got other mechanisms to put in place, controls over the design. It may be that you say, look, we don't want any lighting, or we want this wall to be partially open, or we want the roof to be at a certain grade. You've got some mechanisms through the lease agreement to be able to exert some control over design.
You've got to realise the operation is already approved.
Yes.
Well, what's tenure at the moment?
The existing expires in 2031. The existing lease expires in 2031.
2031, yep, cool.
Well, I think that would give me a great degree of comfort. Go through the notified resource consent to alleviate some of the concerns and fears. I understand what Kathy and Kevin are saying. It's quite legitimate. And I think something personally, at the moment, it's a long-standing activity, as we all know. It's untidy, personally. Just what's there. Could be a lot to improve the site. And I think some of the fears around traffic management may be mitigated or discussed through the resource consent, pedestrian access, etc. Some of the fears or concerns of some of the submitters would be mitigated or alleviated, I believe. But just my position.
So, through the chair.
I will at the committee if they suggesting it should go back, and would like to go back to full council and get some advice on that in the process.
So, John, for Kevin here, if I could jump in. Trying to choose my words carefully here and be diplomatic. The issue is not whether it is an existing entity or a business. It's not how long it's been there or how long it's going to stay. The issue is the Reserves Management Act and our policy, and we are changing our plan to accommodate an application, and there is some legislation which applies to that. It's not even about what they're going to build. It's the fact that they are building. It doesn't matter if they put a 15-story skyscraper or a tin shed there. That's after the event, and that quite rightly will be dealt with by way of the resource management or application process. This is around whether or not the legal status that we are changing from license to occupy to a lease and the precedent that sets. And the precedent goes wider than that because we are changing wording in our plan to accommodate a single entity. What precedent does that set in all our other plans, of which there are many, that we get an application that somebody would request to do something which is outside of scope, and we're then going to face pressure to do that. I'm sorry, I don't want to be too pushy with this, but it's actually, I hear what you're saying, Your Worship and John, around it's a good business. It's a fantastic business. Would I like to see a building there? Absolutely. But only in the right circumstances and done in the right way. And until I have sufficient information to make that appropriate decision, I'm going to sit where I am.
Chairman, could I just follow on for that? Fully agree with what Councillor Taylor has said. Hence my suggestion that a full review of this particular reserve management plan be undertaken, because we have other reserve management plans for other areas of the lake that may well run into the same issue, and I am concerned about that, and I believe that will be challenged if it's not done. So I'm particularly interested in option one, where at this stage it's the status quo until we have had. Now, Mr. Carroll rightly states out, it might take 1 month, it might take 1 year, who knows? But when you're dealing with an issue like that, time's not the issue, it's the outcome that we actually achieve. And I am concerned with the direction that maybe, Mr. Chairman, you may be thinking, and certainly David, which I totally reject. So I'm pretty clear where I stand on this issue.
Thanks, John and Kevin. Well, I personally agree to disagree. I think in terms of the precedent, yep, it may not be challenged. You cannot give any guarantee, I guess, but to me, I just think we should be an enabler. We want progress and want to see people investing in the town, and it's not going to send a great signal. Although it's not really about practicing that role, and it's not whether it's to be a bill or not. It's just that we should be enabling these activities, this development through in our district. But that's just another aspect of my viewpoint. But anyway, I think we probably need to go at this stage. We need to probably test the recommendation anyway. At this stage, it's been presented. There's no other feedback from the floor.
Sorry, just through the chair, John, Anna here. The precedent thing does really concern me as well. Like even in the report, and it talks about applicants wishing to start a new business on the Lakefront Reserve are generally advised there are no opportunities. And this, although it is an existing licence to occupy, and I'm repeating what others have said, this is a brand new lease. So that to me does mean it's a new business, because it will be the permanent new structure. So I'm still struggling with the precedent setting side of things.
Okay, thank you.
Any new application that comes in, for, people can apply to do anything, but it would be held by this committee, so we would decide, whether we look at that as there's only 4 operations along the lakefront, so I would suggest there's not a lot more room for a lot of others, but just a point of clarification, Mr. Chair. So if you're looking to move ahead on this, the or B section is the stage 1? of the recommendation, is that right?
Sorry, trying to,
So going to the recommendations, sorry,
a recommendation, yeah, okay. We have a, recommendation either to,
Turn
I'm
it
just reading
down.
on my phone, it's for small print, sorry.
yeah.
The other thing before we go any further, just as a, for clarity, in the actual, in B, the option B, there's a, on the attachment 2 with the agenda, it does say that there would be provision, potential, or maybe provision for a 1 cubicle toilet. That's not actually in the actual recommendation. So that probably should be, for accuracy, included in there, irrespective of which way we vote.
Sorry, Nick, can you just clarify, is the all version stage 1?
Correct.
Correct. So, you've got your options in front of you there.
I understand it's for stage 1 as well.
Can I make some comment there about what you raised, Mr Chair, about
Thanks,
the
thank you.
toilet cubicle not being included in the wording of the recommendation? The provision for a single toilet cubicle is included in part 2 of that recommendation that refers to the strike-through underline version of the wording in attachment 2. So yes, you're quite correct. I haven't mentioned the toilet cubicle in the second bullet point that talks about the minimal kiosk ticket office. But there is more detail in the strike-through underline version of the wording in attachment 2 that does actually refer to a single, actually including policy, which is what gives this effect that would allow for a single toilet cubicle. So I am not convinced that it needs to be in the wording of the recommendation, but it would certainly make things clear if you wished to include it.
My personal view it should be, but I do take on board your comments. But personally, I think it should be in there because everything else in there except that. But just what other people, other members think. Yeah.
Through the chair, no, I agree. It's referred to as part of attachment 2. It's pretty clear. Like, it's not specifically spelled out. It is there. It is what it is.
Okay. Well, I think we need to test these recommendations there. The resolutions in front of us. We have 2 recommendations there. Either A, right, the committee agrees to only the minor technical amendments and rejects all changes that permit further development at the whole operation. And the committee, number 2, the committee approves the changes to the Taupō Bay Lakeshore Reserve management plan that are detailed in the strike through / underlined version attached as in attachment 1. Or B, 1, the committee agrees to all of the minor technical amendments and the changes that permit the following additional activities: a lightweight open-sided roof structure over the trees to provide for all weather use, a minimal kiosk ticket office for sales associated with the golf activity, and non-alcoholic refreshments but without an indoor dining area, construction of an open viewing area to enable spectators and customers to safely walk without attracting passing cycle and pedestrian traffic, stabilisation of the bank and foreshore, also matter of including the actual capacity for a single cubicle toilet. And 2, and the committee approves the changes to the Taupō Bay Lakeshore Reserve management plan that are detailed in the strike through / underline version attached as attachment 2.
I'll test the room. I'm happy to move the or option B, Mr Chairman.
So we have a mover for option B.
Which one are we looking at? Because if I go to page, are these the ones on 1, 2 and 3? Or are they the ones that are further on in the document?
There are two recommendations on the first page, John. Yeah,
John, Yvonne here. I'm
Page
just
3.
going to say I'm not prepared to vote on anything at the moment.
Okay. I haven't got a
I'm-
second here, John.
Okay, I'm prepared to second that recommendation.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So does anybody want to speak for or against?
Kathy
Yeah,
here,
you've got it.
John, just through the chair.
Thanks, Kathy.
I'm with Yvonne. I'm against, and I would like to see more information be forthcoming.
So, John, Kevin here.
Thank you, Kevin.
Probably addressed to Shaney here. A question of process. Once we work through options A and B, I'd like to put option C on the table and propose a new motion. So I'm happy to take advice on the appropriate process.
So you have a motion which has been moved and seconded, and you do need to dispose of that before you consider another motion. So we need to get to the point of putting that.
Are councillors allowed to talk in support or against? You want against first or support?
It's a bit hard to hear everybody, but I've just given my version of it, and I think obviously there's Congress the fact, obviously a lot of work to be done going forward with the to allay, notwithstanding Kevin's the legality and the precedent, I think to allay fears or concerns with regard to the end product basically. I think also with the to me anyway, on the Reserves Act, 53, 54, I'm quite comfortable that with what the process is signed, and so I don't have any issues personally.
Mr. Chair, can I check? I've moved the suggested recommendation. You've seconded it. I think.
Yeah.
Can I
Okay. Well, we need to take a vote on
suggest
this,
you go to the floor, please?
All in favour?
Which one are we voting on, A or B?
Oh, B.
B.
All those in favour? Aye.
Aye. I haven't used that. I can't.
How many's that?
I
Fine.
can't see from my position.
Sorry. Can you put the
You, John.
hands up in favour again? Sorry.
Yeah. So how many in favour? Sorry, I can't. It's not very.
So, sorry, Mr. Chairman, with you being online, so it's my count is that it's 4 in favour and 4 against,
4 in favour, 4
and
against.
1 abstention.
Okay.
So, Shani, I'll look to you for some procedural advice, but generally the chair has casting vote. Would that be? It applies to committees.
So-
Can we just double check? Just if you want to, Mr. Chairman, just give us a second. We're just checking a procedural matter, and then we can get back to you.
So my understanding, I delivered the vote. I have a casting vote.
That's what we're just checking at the moment. It's certainly that case for council. We're just checking that that applies for committees as well.
It does.
So that's correct, Mr. Chairman. Clause 19.3 of the standing orders provides that the chairperson has a casting vote. So given that we were 4 all, and yourself as the chair voted in favour, my read is that the motion has been passed.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So the recommendation been approved. The recommendation be approved.
Correct.
Okay, I guess I think everyone. It's not been an easy decision to make. For everyone's got their very respected viewpoint on it, and so we just need to move forward now and to see how it pans out. Obviously, the next stage, I guess, from Nick, I guess there'll be a process to go. There's going to be a process to go through with the what you're mentioning, what I'm mentioning, a notified resource consent. Okay.
The
Oh, well,
resource, can I just clarify, Mr. Chair, the resource consent, do we have input into that? No.
So,
Lovely.
so what was that?
Just clarifying, Mr Chair, that whether the resource consent is, has councillor input or not done through consultants.
You will make a choice as to who the hearing panel is that undertakes
Right.
that. So I'm conscious you've got a couple of councillors who
Well-trained.
are approved commissioners. You may choose to utilise them as part of that process, or you may choose to use independents.
Likewise, the applicant gets that choice these days as well. So under the Resource Management Act, the applicant can also say whether they want it to be a councillor or independent.
Okay, thanks for the advice. So I think if that's the conclusion. I'm sorry I'm struggling a bit here. Since this stage of my health, unfortunately. Right, so I think if that's the conclusion, we have if that's the conclusion of the meeting, I guess we can get Anna going to do the karaoke for us, eh?
I think so. Aro ki te tika, aro ki te pai. Oh, sorry, I need to start from the beginning of it.
You're right, you
Yeah.
carry on.
Okay. Unu hia te rito o tēnei hui, kia wātia e runga, kia wātia e raro. Aro ki te tika, aro ki te pai, hui e tai ki e.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. Well
And
done.
the
Appreciate
first
that.
line
We'll
translators
use
remove
that
any
to get an
angst
opportunity.
or
So I
stress that
appreciate
may have
everybody
arisen during the meeting.
your contributions, and I'll just declare the meeting closed. Thank you.